Hi everyone, welcome back to the Murder Tapes podcast, season 2, episode 2. This week has been pretty good for me. I got to model for my university and Lululemon again, which is always a great time. I love everyone over at the co-op. I also got to see Iron Claw, and when I tell you that everyone in the theater left crying, it was insane. You could literally feel everyone's emotions in the room while they were watching it, and overall it was just such a good movie. You definitely need to go see it if you haven't. Before we get into today's case, I do want to give a shout out to my favorite cousin Lana because she recommended this case and she has always been so supportive of me. So thank you so much for recommending it. So today we're going to be talking about the Zack Bowen and Addie Hall case. Zack Bowen was born on May 15th, 1978 in Bakersfield, California. This is honestly kind of weird because my mom's birthday is May 15th, but anyways, he had 2 older brothers and they often moved to different places. Sometimes they would even live on the road as a result of the frequent moving. His dad loved to party and drink, which ultimately led his parents to divorce. Zack and his brother Jed were teenagers when their mom decided to take them both to Santa Maria, California in order to start their new lives. Zack was known by others as the tall and awkward guy that liked to make people laugh. Academically, he struggled to do well in class, and this made it hard on his teachers to focus on him along with all the other students. In the summer of 1995, he and his dad decided to go on a road trip through the southern states in order to find party places. They ultimately ended up in New Orleans and absolutely loved it. They decided that they would live there, and Zack dropped out of high school. Zack quickly got a job as a bartender in the French Quarter, and on one night, he met 28-year-old Lana Shupak. Lana was an exotic dancer from Dallas, Texas that often went around clubs in order to make money. On this night, however, she was visiting New Orleans with some of her friends. They immediately hit it off, but she had to return back to Texas. They kept in touch, and she actually decided to move to New Orleans in order to be with Zack. She found out that she was pregnant not too long after. The only problem was that Zack had lied to her about his age. Lana was 10 years his senior, meaning he was only 18 and she was 28 at the time. I'm now going to play audio of Lana explaining how they met from her perspective.
He was gregarious and funny and happy-go-lucky and easygoing and fun. The relationship developed very quickly. We quickly had feelings for each other. I suddenly found myself pregnant, found out he was 17. I was 27 at the time, so I broke up with him. I was going to have the child. He could be in the child's life, or he didn't have to. I wasn't going to chase him down for anything because I felt that I couldn't force a child upon him that he possibly was not ready for. But he wanted us to be a family.
If you're like me, you're probably wondering why this wasn't something that she confirmed way earlier, but either way, she decided to have the baby. She was mad that he lied about his age and would later recall how immature he was. In fact, she wouldn't tell him that their baby was born until weeks after. Zack wasn't 100% sure he was ready to be a dad, but he still decided to man up and be there. Although he was very immature the first time he saw his son Jackson, everyone around him said something changed. He wanted to have a great relationship with both Lana and his son. He continued bartending and occasionally took other jobs in order to be able to provide for them. This led them to move into an uptown apartment in a nice area. Lana found out that she was once again pregnant with their second child. Then, in October of 1998, when his son was almost a year old, they got married in Jackson Square. Their second child, Lily, was born on June 12, 1999. The following year, after working various jobs, Zack got his GED and enlisted in the Army for an 8-year term. One of his brothers and grandfather had previously served before him. The friends he made while in the military described him as being a funny and respectable guy, which is interesting considering where this story goes. He and his friends often went out to drink, but when he was home, he loved to play the guitar and the drums. Throughout his time in the military, his personality started to change. He saw things that ultimately made him not so bubbly like he was once before. He made it back in New Orleans in the summer of 2001 in order to recover from his recent toe surgery. While on this recovery break, he decided to fill out the necessary paperwork in order for his family to move with him back to Germany on base. Lana didn't like this new place because she couldn't make friends, and it was completely different from the setting that she was used to as an exotic dancer. Zack would often show inappropriate pictures of Lana to his military friends, and they would of course tell their wives about the type of girl he was married to, and none of them wanted to associate themselves with her. The following year, Zack was deployed to Iraq after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. He had also been promoted to sergeant at the time. Lana and the kids stayed in Germany while he was away. Lana had been suffering from hepatitis C, and she struggled to get through this period. Unfortunately, Zack couldn't be there to help with the kids or take care of her. And this of course made him angry because he always did as he was told, but when it came to his family, the military refused to give him that time off. Another thing he witnessed was one of his closest friends dying in a car explosion. The worst incident of all was when the young Iraqi boy he was friends with was murdered along with his family by terrorists because they didn't like that they were friends. This led Zack to start purposefully failing his fitness evaluations in order to try and get kicked out of the military. This led him to be dishonorably discharged, but he never told Lana or the rest of his family. This meant that he wouldn't be able to receive benefits. Lana eventually found out and immediately filed for divorce. In her eyes, the whole reason he joined the military was to provide for their family, but now he'd have to start from scratch. While they planned on getting a divorce, they both decided to move into the same home in New Orleans. They figured that this would be best for the kids until Zack could figure out where he could move. Lana began working again as an exotic dancer while Zack watched the kids at home. Zack eventually started bartending again at a hole-in-the-wall bar called Hogg's Bar. While working at this bar, he met Addie Hall. Addie was raised by her Vietnam veteran father and stay-at-home mom. She was originally from North Carolina but moved to New Orleans after dropping out of high school and traveling the country for a little while. Addie was known as a free-spirited girl that loved to write poetry and dance. She even taught salsa and ballroom dancing for a while. Her friends described her as a hardworking girl that had a very creative mind and a great sense of fashion. She also often worked multiple jobs. It was known that she had a dark sense of humor along with a bad habit. Whenever she drank heavily, she would become abusive and confrontational. When she began experimenting with more drugs, this of course got worse. Before we move into more details, it's interesting to note that one of Addie's close friends, Margaret Sanchez, spoke about Addie in a documentary. You may be wondering why this is interesting, and it's because this friend of hers would actually end up murdering a woman named Jaren Lockhart just a few years after she appeared in the documentary. I think this goes to show the types of people Addie and Zack hung around, but how eerie to think about. Margaret claimed that they were best friends and that Addie told her she was sexually assaulted as a child. She also stated that this led Addie to go after guys that were abusive. This doesn't mean all people abused as children follow these footsteps, but it is something to make note of in this case. Some of Addie's other friends would even refer to how she acted when she was super drunk as a frightening mean streak. She liked attention from some of the customers at the bar, but she would also get angry when they looked at her too long or tried to touch her, which I honestly don't see as rude because drunk customers are never fun to deal with. But this was a problem because there were times when she would be way too aggressive about the situation. Zack became interested in Addie and flirted with her for weeks, but at the time, she wasn't into him. After a while, she began to like him, however, and the two began dating. Zack even told his mom that he was sure he found his soulmate. Just a month after they began dating, Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, and Lana made it clear that she wanted Zack to stay with her and the kids, but Zack stayed at Addie's apartment and told Lana that they would be fine. Luckily, Addie's apartment was located in the French Quarter, and this area wasn't as bad as the others. They were enjoying their time together through and after the hurricane. They could be seen camping out, making drinks and handing them out, and even rescuing stray cats. They received media attention for all the things they were doing and were even featured in the New York Times. The article was called "Holdouts on Dry Ground Say, Why Leave Now?" I'll link it in the show notes along with the rest of the evidence. Addie also flashed cops that passed by because she said that this would make them come back to check on them. While this time allowed them to become closer, it also allowed for chaos. Addie stopped taking her medication for her bipolar disorder during this time, and even after the hurricane, she stopped purchasing it because she couldn't afford it. Their friends would recall how happy they were together, but they also remembered that Zack had kids. During this time, Zack didn't check on them or try to contact them in any way. So much so that Lana thought that he died during the hurricane. Her and the kids had been staying in a shelter and were soon on their way to Sugar Land, Texas. Lana began waitressing at an Applebee's in order to provide for her and the kids, but she soon found out that Zack was alive and well. She returned to New Orleans and demanded that he pay child support. She also demanded that he have the kids every 2 weeks. Addie loved Zack, but she didn't want a tied-down lifestyle. She didn't want to meet Lana or the kids, and she wouldn't let the kids stay at her apartment either. This led Zack to rent a hotel during the weeks he had the kids. He also got a second job delivering groceries while Addie continued bartending, this time at a jazz club called the Spotted Cat. They both continued to drink alcohol and do drugs together, which led Addie to spiral into her aggressive ways. They kept breaking up and getting back together during this time. They both also found themselves getting in more trouble together. Addie had gotten arrested after she pulled a gun on a man. She held the gun towards him and yelled, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" before running to her apartment to hide from police. The man called the police and told them what she was wearing, which were blue jeans and a t-shirt, but when they arrived, she had since changed into a nightgown. When police searched the home, they found weed and 2 pipes. The man she pointed the gun at was able to identify her, and she was charged with aggravated assault with a firearm, possession of drug paraphernalia, and first offense possession of marijuana. Then, after police got a call from the same apartment just a month later, Zack was seen dropping a bag of marijuana from the stoop of the apartment. He too was charged with first offense possession of marijuana. Not only were they doing more drugs than ever before, they also developed a $400 a week cocaine addiction. This expensive habit led to her eviction. Zack didn't like the fact that Addie loved to dance at the bar she worked at because customers often looked and flirted with her. This led Zack to try and make her jealous by going to strip clubs and hanging around other girls. Of course, this would start fights between the two. One night, they were both drinking and playing board games together when an argument ensued. They began yelling at each other, and Zack hit Addie. This was the first time he had ever hit her. He realized what he had done and decided to head to Portland in order to clear his head, but soon he felt that he couldn't move on without her. They both couldn't stay away from each other despite how horrible they were to and for each other. When he arrived back in New Orleans, they spent lots of time together and continued to do the same things as before. This led a lot of their friends and family to cut them off because they were all tired of the toxicity. They were violent with each other and no one enjoyed hearing it or dealing with it. Oddly, Zack would go to Addie's job in order to watch her work in order to make sure that no one was hitting on her. Addie got fed up with it one night and told him to give her space, but he replied, "If I can't have you, nobody can." Which this should have been the biggest red flag. Despite the conflict, they got a new apartment located at 826 Rampart Street just above the Voodoo Temple. Their landlord, Leo Watermeyer, would say that they both seemed happy. When they first moved in, they talked about how much fun they had during Hurricane Katrina, but this quickly changed. A little while after they moved in, Addie told Leo that she was planning on kicking Zack out and she wanted to take his name off of the lease. She said, quote, "I caught him cheating on me, and I'm kicking him out of this apartment." Apparently, she found out that Zack had been messing around with a man in real estate. Addie already had trust issues, and this just made it worse. She was extremely angry. Zack would tell the landlord, quote, "Did you just let her sign a lease alone? Because I'm screwed. I'm totally messed up now. She's trying to kick me out of our apartment." Their landlord didn't want confrontation and told them to settle their differences and let him know what they decided. But time went on and Leo assumed that they broke up because he hadn't seen Addie anymore. But little did he know that other people hadn't seen her either. She never returned to work, and Zack told him and her friends that she moved back to North Carolina. To them, he seemed sad about it, and for about 2 weeks he continued partying and spending more of his money. He was seen drinking alcohol, doing drugs, and spending money on strippers. On October 17, 2006, video surveillance at the Omni Hotel would capture Zack taking one last drink before jumping off the edge of the building to his death. At first, it appeared to have been just a suicide case, but they found a note in his pocket that stated otherwise. The note said, quote, "I killed her at 1 a.m. Thursday, October 5th. I very calmly strangled her. It was very quick. This is not accidental. I had to take my own life to pay for the one that I took. If you send a patrol car to 826 North Rampart, you will find the dismembered corpse of my girlfriend Addie in the oven, on the stove, and in the fridge, along with a full signed confession from myself, Zack Bowen. I scared myself not by the action of calmly strangling the woman I've loved for 1.5 years and then desecrating her body, but by my entire lack of remorse. I've known forever how horrible of a person I am, ask anyone, and decided to quit my jobs and spend the $1,500 cash I had being happy until I killed myself. So that's what I did. Good food, good drugs, good strippers, good friends, and any loose ends I may have had. I didn't contact any of my family, so that'll explain the shock, and had a fantastic time living out my days. It's just about time now. Police quickly went to the apartment and found beer cans and moving boxes. It was very messy, and there was spray paint all over the walls that read, "Call my wife," including Lana's phone number. I'm a total failure. Look in the oven. I love her, and please help me stop the pain. He also spray painted arrows towards the oven that led them to find Addie's dismembered legs in a turkey pan. The 2 pots on the stove contained Addie's head along with her feet and hands. Her body parts had been cooking to the point where the skin was pulling away from the bone. Police would later reveal that her body parts were also seasoned with herbs, but none of them were eaten. In the fridge was her torso and other body parts. They would also reveal that the dismemberment of Addie's body was slow. He would do it between his nights of partying and wrote down the steps in his journal. The police pieced together the evidence and stated that while they were arguing, Addie shouted that she felt humiliated because he slept with a man, and Zack became enraged. He yelled at her to shut up because others could hear her, but she continued to yell. Zack grabbed her by her neck and began strangling her until she died. He then laid on the floor and gathered his thoughts. He began to write down what happened and how he violated her body after. He even said that he still loved her. It's important to note that these final moments show his true colors and just how sick he truly was. Over the next couple of days, he didn't go to work. When he decided to, he looked like a drunk. He told Addie's friends that she had left to go to North Carolina, as I mentioned earlier, and then proceeded to do cocaine at their apartment while Addie's body was still lying on the floor. Her body began to decompose, and a strong odor began to take over the apartment. This is when he decided to set their thermostat to 60 degrees and he carried her to the bathroom. He then grabbed a knife and a hacksaw and began dismembering her body. After doing so, he cleaned the bathroom, although because Addie had been dead for a while, there wasn't much blood to clean. Then he set out to withdraw whatever money he had from his bank account and spent the next 10 days doing as he pleased, as mentioned earlier. In the journal I mentioned earlier, Zack made a list of his failures. He wrote that he felt like a failure while in the military. He also felt like he failed his marriage, family, and friends. It's important to note that Zack and Addie had multiple mental disorders. Zack in particular suffered from PTSD due to his time in the military. I've linked a scientific article in the show notes that ties aggression and outbursts to ex-military, but it should also be mentioned that this isn't always the case. Zack also drank a lot and did lots of different drugs that definitely affected him even more. Addie had bipolar disorder, and while she was off of her medication, she too was doing lots of drugs and drinking alcohol, which messes up the brain even more. There are theories that Zack may have been possessed because they lived at the Voodoo Temple, but this place was actually known for its good energy, aside from the fact that previous tenants reported fans randomly turning on when the electricity is off and hearing random moaning sounds. Now it is referred to as the Rampart Street Murder House and is actually a part of the New Orleans Ghost Tour. This case was so sad to research and easily one of the eeriest murder-suicides I had ever read through. As always, all evidence will be linked in the show notes. Feel free to follow us on Instagram at Murder Tapes Podcast or my personal at Annalisa. If you like the show, please leave a review because it helps the show out so much. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you on the next one.